I'm your host, Samantha Reigle, an intuitive and longtime mediator with over 20 years of experience helping people move through conflict. In my work, I help people resolve disputes, but in this podcast, I explore what conflict is revealing. It shows up to show us what is out of alignment within us, between us, and in the world that we're moving through. This podcast is your space to move from reaction to response, to meet discomfort with clarity and stay grounded in who you are. One thing I've learned and truly embodied from working in this field as long as I have is that there's not a single conflict that cannot be resolved. Pretty radical, right? You're probably thinking, yeah, right, Samantha, what about the Middle East or Russia or authoritative regimes that have held power for generations? How could you possibly say a terrorist attack or decades-long occupation could ever be resolved peacefully without war to prime the population? Isn't that sad, though? What I just said, prime the population with war? Like humanity has to be beaten down before we finally say, enough is enough. I don't want to fight anymore. That's the cycle I want us to start interrupting, because what if we didn't have to wait for devastation to wake up? What if we could start responding differently the moment conflict first shows up, instead of after everything completely falls apart? And look, I get it. Those are some huge, complex conflicts, but at their core, they're still just human conflicts. They're scaled up. And what I've seen again and again, whether it's between two people or two nation states, is that when resolution doesn't happen, it's almost always because of one of two things: time, or the right people aren't yet at the table, maybe even with the right ideas. Most of the mediations that I've personally facilitated were one-day sessions, civil disputes that had often been festering for months or years. When a resolution didn't emerge that day, I'd tell the parties, look, we've just created a template for this to resolve, so keep talking. Because once people start engaging in a healthy, resolution-focused dialogue, the energy begins to shift, and more often than not, they come back days or months later having it all worked out. It just needed time. And the same principle applies on the world stage. If nations weren't so quick to reach for violence as an option, if they treated war as the absolute last resort instead of the first option on the whiteboard, or here's an even more radical thought, not even a viable option. Like, let's not even make war an option at all. Imagine what could change. Peace doesn't come from perfect solutions. It comes from creating time and space for dialogue, for brainstorming, for trial and error. Eventually, that happens anyway, usually after years of destruction, when the population has been torn apart by death and mental illnesses and poverty and exhaustion. Parties do eventually sit down and engage in peace talks. So why not start with the resolution discussions instead of ending with it? Now, other times when matters don't resolve in mediation, the missing piece isn't necessarily time, it's the people. Sometimes it's the person with the real decision-making power is not at the table. Sometimes the trusted advisor whose perspective carries weight is not at the table. Or maybe it's the expert who can expand the field of possible solutions when you're in that brainstorming phase is not at the table. So conflict has a way of showing you who and what needs to be present for peace to take shape. Let me give you an example. So if I'm mediating a dispute between an employer and an employee, and they both agree that a severance deal is the best way to move forward, they essentially want to dissolve the relationship so everyone can go their separate ways. But there's no HR representative at the table who can clarify benefits, or the employee's spouse who handles all the finances in their household isn't part of that conversation. And that missing person can create hesitation. Because that makes sense, right? You can't negotiate confidently if the people or information you need aren't readily available. And that's why resolution can't be forced. It has to be supported by the right conditions and the right people. And that truth scales from just the individuals that I mediate with to entire nations. When you look at history, even the most entrenched conflicts eventually transform when the right people finally come to the quote unquote table and enough time has ripened the moment for resolution. There's a perfect example of this in history. I learned about this back in college, but the first democratically elected president of the Czech Republic, he helped lead what was called the Velvet Revolution, a nonviolent movement that overthrew the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. Let me say that again. They were able to overthrow a regime without any violence. That transformation, it came from timing, from people who were finally ready to move out of domination and into dialogue. And if you've never studied international relations, aren't from that part of the world, or you're hearing this story for the first time, here's why it's so remarkable. The entire system of communism in that country relied on collective buy-in, just like any system does. Democracy relies on all of us collectively buying into it. Every system, political, economic, even social, only works because people believe that it works. The government's power existed because people believed it did, or at least they believed everyone else thought the government was powerful. And that's true for leaders too. They only have the power we give them. We hand it over through our belief that they're the all-powerful ones, that they know better, that they can fix it, and we're somehow smaller or less capable. But authority is not innate. It's constructed. It's built on collective belief we all have to buy in, and it can dissolve the moment people remember their own agency. That's the illusion that the first democratically elected president of Czechoslovakia exposed. I think his name was like Havel or something, Havel. And it's the same illusion that keeps so many systems standing today. When everyone around you seems to accept something, it's easy to assume it must be true or unchangeable. But here's the thing. When we collectively believe something to be true, it becomes true in our own reality. And when those beliefs start to shift, or when someone has the courage to question them, that shared reality begins to change too. And when that shift happens, it can look like chaos, but it will eventually settle into that new field. And this is something I talk about a lot. Conflict shows up when our beliefs no longer align with us, whether that's on a personal level or a global one. It's the same energetic process. The tension we feel is the gap between the old belief that's collapsing and the new truth that's trying to emerge. Okay? Let me say that again. So this conflicted tension that you might have inside of you, or that's being reflected externally, is what we feel and what we see when the gap between this old belief that we all had collectively, or maybe that we have internally, is collapsing, and a new truth is trying to emerge through this chaos or, conflicted feelings that we may have. And that's exactly what that, democratically elected president did in Czechoslovakia, Havel. He used performative art to expose the illusion of communism. He used theater, writing, public dialogue. He showed people that the collective agreement upholding the power and structure of communism was already cracking. And once people started talking honestly with each other, they realized the majority didn't actually believe in it anymore. everyone just kept their beliefs to themselves when they thought everybody else around them believed in it. But when they started actually communicating with each other and using his art as a trigger for that communication, they actually all looked around and at each other and said, wait, none of us believe in this anymore. And within 2 months of Havel creating this movement, the regime fell peacefully. No war, no bloodshed, just a collective awakening to what their beliefs actually were, no longer in alignment with what's being reflected. And that's the power of perspective and the right person bringing that perspective to the table at the right time. A decades-long system of control dissolved, not because of violence and war, but because one man helped people see differently. He didn't force change, he revealed a truth through his art. And when people could finally see it for themselves, the whole structure collapsed on its own. And that's what I mean when I say conflict doesn't always need to be fought through. Sometimes it just needs to be understood. So here's the thing. We don't always know who the right person is or what the right idea will be. It often takes trial and error, and that's okay. That's part of the process because trial and error, dialogue, experimentation, even when it's messy and uncomfortable, are still infinitely better than war and destruction. The consequences of war don't just end when fighting stops. I think we all know this. Those of us who've been around for a while, we've seen war and destruction play out in our own lives and with our own family members and friends that might have been involved in some of these wars that are happening across the planet. They actually ripple through generations too, the emotional trauma. Entire lineages will carry that trauma forward. So what if, instead of rushing towards reaction and retaliation, we slowed down long enough to experiment with peace? I mean, war takes years anyway. Why not spend those years testing ideas, bringing new voices to the table? Let time do what war never can: heal the population. So whether it's between two nations or two people, that patience, that willingness to stay in the discomfort and keep trying, that's what creates the conditions for lasting peace. And maybe that's the real invitation here, to start seeing conflict differently. Because peace doesn't just begin when the fighting stops. It begins the moment we choose to meet conflict with curiosity instead of fear. So when I talk about conflict, I want us to start thinking differently about it. Instead of seeing it as, me versus you or us versus them, what if we asked, what is this here to show me? What is this here to show all of us? And that one question shifts everything. It moves us out of resistance and into awareness, out of fear into curiosity. And curiosity is what brings about neutrality. It's where peace begins. I know this is a pretty radical idea, but I really do believe that there is no such thing as an unresolvable conflict. Resolution's always possible when the right conditions emerge, enough time for emotions to settle, the right people at the table, and then the collective will to create a stage for peace. And here's what's so fascinating about the time we're living in right now. We're entering an age where those conditions might actually be easier to create. We're in this era of artificial intelligence where brainstorming and problem solving can happen faster and more creatively than ever before. And if you listen to me long enough, you've probably heard me say this. War is a failure of the imagination. It's what happens when creativity runs out, when we stop believing there are any other options left. But what if that's changing? AI, when used consciously, can expand the brainstorming part of conflict resolution. It can help us imagine solutions we might never have thought of on our own, or see conditions we would normally miss. It can model outcomes, it can reveal blind spots, and even serve as that neutral voice in the room when the right people or perspectives aren't yet there. And what makes that so powerful is that AI is learning from all of us right now, from our humanity, from our patterns, our language, our values, our mistakes, and our breakthroughs. It's being trained on who we are and who we are becoming as a human species. So as we evolve, as we grow more self-aware and innovative, I think this technology will evolve with us. It will reflect our collective intelligence and creativity, meaning the options that it generates can actually fit into who we are as a human species and how we're growing. So maybe this is how we begin to close that gap between conflict and resolution, by using the technology to stretch our imagination instead of our capacity for war and destruction. Because if war really is the absence of creativity, then AI might just be one of the most powerful tools we have to reimagine what peace can look like faster, broader, and in more creatively than we've ever been, and more creatively than ever before. So that's the lens I want you to start carrying with you, that conflict, any form, isn't just something to get through. It's a portal. It's an opening. It's life saying, here's your chance to do this better, to be better, to respond differently this time and get yourself out of this loop. Okay, I want to get into some questions submitted by listeners, because these are the real moments where theory meets life, right? Where we get to look at how conflict actually shows up in our relationships, our workplaces, our communities, and even internally, whether it's family argument, workplace standoff, or something unfolding in the world around us, the principles are going to be the same. And if something in your life has been stirring, a conflict that's challenging you, confusing you, or maybe even waking you up, I'd love to hear about it. You can leave me a voicemail using the link in my show notes. Tell me what's happening, and I might answer it on an upcoming episode. Okay, let's get into it. Our first question is as follows. Here we go. Why is the Middle East area so politically unstable? I understand some of the surface level reasons, like the religious or cultural tensions people often mention, but I still don't really understand why this area seems to experience so much ongoing conflict. Can you help me understand what's actually behind all that? All right, I really appreciate you asking that from a place of curiosity, because that's where understanding begins. So when we talk about the instability in the Middle East, most people will point to religion and politics, but conflict can happen when who we believe we are collides with who someone else believes they are. And when identity feels threatened, whether that's personal, cultural, or national, that instinct is going to be protected at all costs. Now imagine that on the scale of millions of people, generations deep, whose collective identities have been shaped, divided, manipulated by colonization, by borders that were drawn for them, and by foreign powers with competing belief systems. That's going to create that existential tension. When people feel their sense of belonging or purpose is under attack, they're going to fight to preserve it, even if that means clinging to an idea of an identity that's no longer serving them. Because identity isn't logical. It's like an emotional pull. It's what's woven through your ancestry. And this is where I think the deeper truth lies. Conflict shows up as a way to reveal that our beliefs are no longer aligned with our evolution. So it's life's way of saying the story doesn't fit anymore. When we apply that to the Middle East, maybe the question isn't just why the region is unstable, but what beliefs might be holding it back from evolving? Could it be identity? Because so much of the struggle there centers around who people believe they are and what they must defend and what they think peace should look like. When identity becomes so rigid, when it fuses to pain and power or the past, it can block growth. It keeps the conflict looping because the fight becomes about protecting the old identity instead of allowing a new one to emerge. But maybe that's what we're seeing now. It's the loop. These conflicts have been repeating for thousands of years, just taking on new faces and new names. It's like humanity keeps circling the same lessons about identity, power, and belonging, and we just haven't fully learned them yet. It's about something trying once again to finally break that pattern, to evolve beyond it. And that's why it feels so chaotic, because the old stories are still running, but they don't fit anymore. The world's changing. Consciousness is changing, but some of our beliefs are still stuck in survival mode. So instead of seeing it as like constant chaos, maybe we can see it as life trying to push the same wound to the surface again to finally get our attention. And I think it's working. And that's just not unique to the Middle East. We see it everywhere in the US, in our politics and families, even inside ourselves. Every conflict, from the personal to the geopolitical, is really asking the same question. Who am I now that the old story no longer fits me? And that's why I keep saying conflict is a portal. It's just here to wake us up to what it's trying to show us. It's the mirror that shows us where our beliefs are out of alignment with who we're becoming. Again, when I look at what's happening in that region and across the world, I just don't see instability. I see transformation trying to happen within the population. It's slow, it's painful, it's layered, but it's moving. And that's what gives me hope. As we evolve individually and collectively, our systems have to evolve with us. And if we can start seeing conflict as the invitation it truly is, maybe we'll finally start responding to it in a way that creates less pain. I hope this explanation helps you understand this better. I'm going to get into the next question, okay? So here we go. I'm really struggling with the inability to address conflict in my relationship. It feels like there are two extremes. Either I'm the best person in the world and can do no wrong, or I'm the worst and everything about me is a problem. And sometimes that shift happens in an hour or less. It's so confusing because when things swing that fast, there's no middle ground to actually talk about what's wrong or solve anything. How do you handle conflict when the other person moves between two extremes? Okay, so what you're describing is incredibly common. It's confusing and draining, and it makes you feel like there's no solid ground to stand on. Because, 1 minute you're the hero, and then the next you're the villain, right? And you can't even find space in between those two roles to have that real conversation. But here's the thing. This conflict is showing up for you. It's not just about your partner's extremes, although that's kind of alarming, but it is revealing something about what's happening inside of you. When we find ourselves in relationships where communication feels impossible, it's often because something deeper in us is still seeking validation. We're unconsciously measuring our worth through maybe how the other person sees us. So when they idealize you, it feels safe and comforting and loving. And then when they criticize or withdraw, it's going to hit that old wound that says, I'm only lovable if I'm seen as good and perfect. And that's the belief this conflict is probably trying to expose to you. I mean, this is just me giving my answer after hearing your quick question. So you're going to have to do the exploration yourself. But if this resonates, and I hope it does, then you're not reacting to the person. You're reacting to the story you learned about who you have been in order to be accepted and loved. And that's where conflict becomes a portal. It's life saying, this belief doesn't fit who you're becoming anymore. You're outgrowing it. When your identity is tied to being seen a certain way, you're going to feel destabilized anytime someone's perception shifts about you. And that's why you swing with them, because their view of you still has too much power over you. So again, this isn't just about communication issue. It's an invitation to anchor your own sense of worth internally, not externally. You don't need that external validation. To stop letting someone else's approval or disapproval define who you are. And once you start to see it that way, the whole dynamic will shift. You'll stop chasing harmony and start creating it yourself. You'll realize that you don't even need to convince someone to see you accurately in order to feel at peace. You just need to see yourself clearly. And that's where the evolution happens. That's what this conflict, I think, is here to teach you, to detach from your perception of who you are and then find actually out, the stability in your truth about who you actually really are. Okay? So maybe next time, don't frame the question as, why can't we communicate? But frame it as, what part of me still needs this person to see me as good in order to feel safe? And that's the work, okay? Once you change that belief on the inside, your behaviors with your partner will start to shift, and the relationship will either evolve to accommodate that shift or not. All right, I hope that helps. If there's one thing I want you all to take away from this episode, it's that there is no such thing as an unresolvable conflict. Not between nation states, not between partners, not even within yourself. Every conflict holds the potential for resolution when the right conditions are met. Time and the right people or perspectives at the table, and the willingness to see it differently. Because conflict isn't the end of the connection, it's the beginning of understanding. So as you move through your own week, notice where conflict is showing up. Not as something to fix or avoid, but as a mirror. And ask yourself, what is this trying to show me about what I believe? Because whether it's in your relationship at work or in the world around you, every moment of tension is really that invitation to evolve. The world doesn't change because we win arguments, right? It changes because we see ourselves more clearly and start to respond differently. So until next time, instead of reacting, respond with intention.